Welcome back. And to all the folks that got roped into the rolling disaster I've tricked YouTube into marketing as a successful channel, welcome to my own personal hell. I like it like my nuclear reactors and breakfast burritos, which is to say, spicy. Also, if you're new, you really should start at the beginning. I won't pretend it makes the series more comprehensible on a gameplay level because things like knowing what you're doing don't really vibe well with Gregtech New Horizons, but it will at least give you some context as to how we got here. Today's episode begins with me ripping out enormous wads of regretty spaghetti, previously known as my entire power infrastructure, before turning right back around and reinserting the spaghetti in a task that seems to have become something of a trend in the series as of late. Today's flavor of electric linguine is UHV, a voltage tier that I only just started being able to produce hatches and dynamos for, and if the supercritical plasma, formerly known as my tongue, could speak, it would say that yes, the wires are blue raspberry flavor. In previous tiers, unlocking the next tier of voltage processing would in turn create a sweeping diaspora of advancement opportunities. Much like social mobility in the United States, the random advancement opportunities have largely dried up though, and I now live in a carefully constructed technological hierarchy orchestrated by a handful of NEETs operating under the delusion that everyone else has as much free time as they do. What actually happens is, despite my quest book saying I'm halfway through UHV, I still have to play catch-up with all of the UV upgrades that should have been finished in UV, but require UHV amounts of processing speed-up to complete within a natural human lifespan. Case in point, rugged botnium casings. Critical upgrade takes forever. Begone, bubblegum demon casing, get thee in my storage system, and never return again. Of course, upgrades need not be to existing machines. After being force-fed the mechanic for the past 3 tiers or so, I finally read the 10-foot neon writing on the wall and built up a space that can properly house my bacterial vat setups. The inciting factor here was materials I need for the UHV circuit line, namely seaweed, because there is not a snowball's chance in Satan's armpit of me getting anywhere with just bees making the stuff, but I will need it for Xenazine later on down the line as well, and I'm almost certain to need it for other things, so I built in space to grow. I also built a fluid heater. Really should have made this, 3 tiers ago, but I never needed bulk fluid heating operations done until I started having to do bulk crafting of sterilized biomediums, so there wasn't much point. Once all the seaweed slops finished breeding and cultivating and extracting and chemically reacting and all of the other things you have to do to it to turn it into useful circuitry components, I am actually already good to begin doing the UHV circuit line, which is a really pleasant change of pace. Actually, let's see how long that lasts, shall we? Yeah, so big shocker, the answer is not long. Higher tier circuits on the BioWare line need a new solder type called mutated living solder as one of their ingredients, which is created in my freshly upgraded botnium chem plant. Unfortunately for me, I was so focused on getting the baby barf box going that I forgot to check the ingredients on the solder itself, and it turns out that I need bismuth and tin plasma, the former of which requires zinc plasma to make. I could theoretically upgrade or swap out some of my fusion reactors to produce the stuff, instead of making 3 more, but, well, let's be honest here, I kinda just want to see how high I can stack donuts before the die-hard New Horizons fans start screaming in the comments section about how I'm doing it wrong. The last 2 circuits of the line require assembly line processing to construct, rather than the usual circuit assembly setup, which I'm less than thrilled about. Despite several hours of tinkering, I have yet to figure out a consistent way of getting advanced assembly lines to respect input blocking, and even when the lines don't block themselves, trying to process 2 recipes at once, the stocking speed of items is slow enough that the lines will pretty frequently stall out while the system is trying to resupply them. Still, the systems work well enough to poop out a few handfuls of circuits, so once I have living solder, the process is pretty much plug and play, give or take me forgetting to research the recipe first and spending a solid 5 minutes trying to figure out why the machines aren't working. And now that circuitry is out of the way, it's time to start engaging in the 7-layer hell-flavored bean dip that is recursive infrastructure upgrades, because try as I might, I can't make everything with bees. And I really tried. First on the list is upgrading the little seen and less noticed bit of my base housing my neutron accelerators. Naquita refinement has been the cornerstone of my energy infrastructure since I transitioned from conventional uranium vac nukes, and in that time I have upgraded these things once, which is not gonna cut it. Let's make them a little bit taller. Just a little bit. Yeah, that seems about right. Taller is better, because taller means faster. And right now they're rivaling the donut stack, which must mean they must be really good, right? Right? So anyway, the next big transition is upgrading my mega chemical reactors to UHV, and also upgrading all of their fluid input buses to hold over 2,000 buckets of fluid at a time. And yes, this is necessary. And no, it is not sufficient. There are probably progression reasons to do this, but for me, the motivating factor is a single recipe, which is better Naquita fuel production. Because more power is more gooder, so twice as much power output should be twice as better. And also because my Volcanus array has started to experience brownouts, which is no bueno, and if that happens to an advanced assembly line or something, that could get real expensive really quickly. This whole upgrading cycle has the interesting effect of bouncing my LSC's power levels like a rubber ball on a concrete floor. You can tell by how fast the redstone is cycling that the capacitor is really not liking this. And so, with circuits craftable and my material base secured enough to delude the quest book into thinking that I'm ready to proceed, I take my first step into the final fleshed out voltage tier in this version of the pack, UEV. And then I take that step right back out, because I am simply not ready. So how do we get ready? 2 words: more infrastructure. Step 1, retrofit half of your cryo freezers into producing on-demand liquid air for high-efficiency fart production. Yes, this game has finally turned me into a used vacuum salesman. I can now make more stuff, I guess, though, so was it worth it? Probably not. But hey, when have I ever considered the long-term ramifications of my poor life choices? Value judgments aside, this upgrade enables me to queue up the single largest production bill I have ever ordered, a whopping 43 UV tier component assembly line casings. Out of every other exotic material involved in making them, nitrogen was the limiting factor here, and I have no idea why. I haven't read the actual cost breakdown for anything I've been making in the past, basically since I got my AE2 systems, actually. So I have literally no idea what was consuming it. My theory was ammonia, but I can't be bothered to figure it out. The game's already kind of a cookie clicker as far as I'm concerned, and my little pea brain can't comprehend the orders of magnitude that are being expressed here unless they're represented in alphabet soup and emojis. So when my ME system said I needed this much nitrogen, I made a machine that can make this much, and just kind of called it good. Makes me a little bit more concerned about an intelligence singularity, honestly, because my factory's about as smart as an empty soup can, and all it took to transition from me automating it to it automating me was a few dozen blaring warnings to the effect of, "Hey buddy, I'm out of effluent giggle crackers, and if you don't make me more, I will violently expatriate your tendons to Cambodia." Meanwhile, back in the real world, let's find something to do with ourselves while we wait. Like, clean up all of the industrial, poopy that I've been leaving all over the place while attempting to prevent my tendons from being expatriated to Cambodia, because right now my factory looks like a mocap shiv fight of Agamemnon stables facing off against the entire steampunk genre, and I'm not sure who's winning, but it sure as heck isn't me. The biggest beneficiary of my mechanical mani-pedi is by far the vac nuke setup, in so much as it now no longer exists. Sometime during the Great Reshuffling, the last of my nuclear cores finally dried up, and I can think of exactly 0 reasons to keep the thing around for sentiment unless I want my base to spontaneously explode. So long, soldier. You served me well. And also scared the living daylights out of me. Holy am I glad that thing's no longer operational. Like the material costs, I'm entirely in the dark about how long my Great Mega Bill took, because I play this pack like an idle game, and a solid 90% of my playtime is playing with wiring or clearing out production jams. But, tentatively, a few hours later, maybe, it's done, which means I have everything I need for a really, really extra machine. And this is gonna become a trend. This is the component assembly line, also known as Step 2. It is to basic components what the PCB factory is to circuit boards, which is to say, a farting huge, obnoxious, expensive machine that only manages to justify its costs because of the order of magnitude increase in convenience and efficiency it offers to the production process of the things it specializes in. Given enough power, time, and raw resources, and this machine can fabricate any component in the game, a stack at a time, from a far more basic set of materials compared to the normal recipes used to make them. This on its own would probably be enough to convince me to use it, because for all of my whining about how long it took, I have spent far too many hours debugging jammed up production lines, and this thing is pretty much idiot proof. But on top of all of that, it gives a healthy 25% discount on the production of all the parts, and lets you scale production with more power. It isn't required, exactly, but I have already climbed the tech mountain, and Dream Master just handed me a stone tablet with the words, "Use this," carved in them, so it might as well be. The trade-off you're making when using it is startup cost. Each one of these machines requires, in addition to all of the other junk, that 43 blocks of component assembly line casing. This stuff comes in tiers, and if you want to craft components of a certain tier, you need that tier of casing installed. The kicker is that each block of casing requires 8 robot arms, 10 pistons, 16 motors, and 24 circuits of that tier to craft, each, which until UV was enough resources to straight up just go to the next tier. Until now. Because, my friends, this is only the beginning. The fun really starts when we have to automate it. The component assembly line is special, in that it has to process item inputs on 8 different context-dependent crafting frequencies fed, naturally, by input buses that have to be placed right next to each other, because heaven itself forbid that we have anything resembling a quality of life in this game. This on its own would be fine, if it wasn't for the fact that those 8 crafting interface frequencies have to share input patch space somehow. I did figure out a way of doing this, but I'll have to take the cursed network engineering for 1,000, please, Alex, because the correct response is, what the fresh new hell is this? The only explanation I can offer to you is the wonderfully evocative phrase, Sudnet Shibari, because our Lord and Savior of scuff game design, Todd Howard himself, blessed this mess, works. And we would be wise to not look too closely at it so long as it doesn't try and sell us horse armor DLCs. Step 3 is far simpler and far larger, and it is a mega distillation tower, because I have a problem, and a need for more distillation capacity. I originally made my Dango distillaces to help mitigate the energy consumption downsides of something called imperfect overclocking. Every time you run an imperfectly overclocked recipe a tier higher than its actual tier, you only get 2 times the speed for 4 times the power, and this penalty stacks multiplicatively with each tier you imperfectly overclock it at. This is no longer a concern for me, because the energy costs for most of my crafting operations are utterly irrelevant, but I'm now running into a different issue, which is that you can't overclock a recipe faster than a single game tick, and 20 rounds of crafting a second simply is not fast enough. Thankfully, to incentivize people, by which I mean people like me, to not do the next obvious thing, higher tier machines have a second mechanic called parallels. This simulates having however many machines as you have parallels running the recipe at the same time. So, for example, a machine with 8 parallels would run 8 instances of the recipe using only 8 times the power, without making the game run the processing tasks for 8 times the machines. My Dango distillaces only support 12 of these, effectively making them as good as 12 equivalently powered distillation towers, give or take some buffs. The Mega Distillation Tower says nuts to that have 256, which is good, because the amount of fluorantimonic acid I'm cranking through is stalling half of my production lines. Fun side note of the day, when I was crafting the blocks for this multi, I misread the bit requesting 3,400 clean stainless steel casings as 34,000. I then made them, and couldn't be bothered to recycle them back into raw materials. The takeaways from this are A, I thought the multi took 34,000 blocks to build, and my knee-jerk response was, yep, that checks out, send it. B, at no point did my production line even seem to notice the extra order of magnitude on my crafting bill. And C, 250,000 stainless steel ingots is so worthless to me that I didn't feel the need to spend 30 seconds recovering them. This game has broken me. Step 4 is bottleneck bashing. This is principally done via either programming my recipes to craft more things at a time to reduce material input shortfalls, cramming bigger buses on all of my machines, or creating new passive automation processes that automatically throttle. or some combination of all three. That whole parallelization tech only becomes relevant if you can supply enough materials to make overclocking worth it, otherwise you're just burning power for no reason. Component production improvements from the component assembly line help a decent amount with this, but at the end of the day, there is no substitute for doing things right in the first place, and I kinda haven't been. It's also so incredibly boring to watch that I was going to script in a Subway Surfer video cameo and make a joke about it being for the folks in my community with, extreme stimulation needs, until I realized that as I was writing that joke into the script, I was also optimizing a nearly endgame New Horizons mega factory, researching Subway servers, and listening to music and a Last Week Tonight episode on YouTube simultaneously. So I decided it would be a bit hypocritical. Okay, so I lied. Not about the multitasking, that was me being completely straight for once. I lied about the upgrades being boring. It isn't entirely boring. Using the disaster piece that was my attempt at automating an advanced assembly line, I was able to hack together a system that functionally acts like an input bus with unlimited capacity. Superbuses only hold 64 stacks, which is not enough, or even close to enough, for really efficient material production, but using a stocking bus that pulls items from a subnetted storage container works just like one, as long as you only need to store 16 different item types. Or, unless you want to shell out for an advanced stocking bus. Either way, Grug-likey, big throughput. Grug-likey processing, 11,560 items a second. Grug's gonna need to get a degree in network engineering if this keeps up, good grief. Oh, hey looky, something interesting. This piece of shiny junk I'm trying to build is called an electric implosion compressor, a machine type that hasn't really seen a whole lot of footage this run, mostly because its biggest contribution in the last 20 episodes was making a single block of bedrockium. The biggest draw for this upgraded version, other than its ability to parallel, is that it doesn't use explosives, which, again, isn't terribly interesting to me, seeing as I'm sitting on roughly 2.4 million tons of TNT that I crafted largely because I forgot that I was doing it. But it is required to progress eventually, so hey, look at me planning ahead. What is this world coming to? Oh wait, I forgot. Its other fun gimmick is that the NEI hologram rendering for it is wrong. The blob of containment blocks is supposed to be solid, but nowhere does the game mention this, and the machine deletes them when you complete the structure. Thanks, New Horizons. Very helpful. This only took me a solid 10 minutes to figure out, and I sure didn't plan on reusing those blocks of infinity for anything important. Like, progressing the game. Speaking of progressing the game, let's try and pretend that we're going to do that. UHV hatches unlock access to my long-awaited Zenazine, a concerningly obnoxious to produce material that lets me make all of my fancy optical circuit components in what is probably not an objectively cheaper fashion, but it does at least involve less processing. And less processing is a thing I could afford to be doing right now. Applied Energistics requires energy to move items for recipes and just run in general, but to date this has never been really all that relevant for me because the energy cost is so small that it's usually dwarfed by the cost of powering the stuff I'm moving it into. Until now, because I'm consuming somewhere like 400,000 AE per second and bouncing my energy storage capacity for it. Conveniently, we have a solution to this, and it's called the Neutronium Energy Cell, a creative mode item that grants infinite energy to any network it's joined with. That's convenient. It's a bit concerning that I need one, admittedly, but still, convenient. Speaking of Zenazine, step 5, make some Radox polymer, aka space plastic. Surely that will have a logical process that makes sense, and oh god, why does it need plasma to craft? What were they thinking? Admittedly, it's not very high-tier plasma, but still, I have a social life, people. So yeah, for the second time this episode, I get to install some new donuts onto the stack. 4 of them, specifically, for titanium, boron, helium, the latter of which is not shown here because I forgot about it, and oxygen. Who needs space heaters when you have New Horizons and a decent CPU? Not me, that's for sure. Fine then. If the game wants to play hardball, I will darn well play hardball. UHV processing unlocks another 2 upgrades to my Naquita fuel production in the form of Naquita fuel Mark III and Mark IV, which give roughly a 400 and 4,400% increase to the energy output of my Nactors, respectively. Materials-wise, it's probably more efficient to burn Mark III than Mark IV, since the point of Mark IV is more energy density than cost savings, but Mark III production capacity is still a major upgrade that is relatively obtainable with my current infrastructure, so let's get some. It also frees up fusion reactors, oddly enough, because the way it processes the light and heavy Naquita fuel types in a single shot means that I don't need them to produce the intermediaries. So this actually dovetails really nicely with my need to start producing more plasma, because of course, yes, 6 fusion reactors in a single episode wasn't enough. I need a 7th one for plasma for redox cracking. Either way, we are still getting closer, but we aren't there yet. 10 hours later, and no, I am not joking, 10 honest, active, playing the game involved hours, I found out that this whole time I haven't been running on a fully upgraded autoassembler. I thought I did this in the last episode, but apparently not, which in retrospect explains why half my recipes were taking so ridiculously long to crack through. And fixing that should help things quite a bit. And finally, with all that out of the way, we are finally ready to start making real upgrade progress. What, did you think I'd be progressing the game state? No, silly, that was just me upgrading my factory to make it possible to upgrade to UHV production standards. We are miles away from actual game progression. I've honestly lost track of the steps involved at this point, so forget about it. The next step of ambiguous ordering is more smelting capacity. Not, as you might expect, smelting capacity for things like neutronium, for which I have 16 dedicated volcanuses and it isn't even approaching sufficient. That comes later. I mean smelting for all of those low-tier materials that I process ambiguous orders of emoji of every time I clean the fingerprint marks off my ME interface. Volcanuses, for all of their remarkable energy efficiency, only have 8 parallels, and linked input buses don't have enough slots to support the throughput necessary to maintain large banks of them, so the solution is our good friend, the Mega EBF. At 256 parallels, processing 20 rounds of recipe a second, and enabled by my newly discovered infinite input bus storage tech, this sucker should be able to output 5,120 recipe rounds a second, which honestly still might not be enough, but doing it in parallel is as easy as connecting more stocking input buses, so that is a solvable problem. While we're at it, let's also make a Mega Alloy Blast Smelter as well. It's the same deal as with the other Mega Block variants I've made so far, 256 parallels at the cost of whatever bonuses you are getting from the smaller upgraded versions. In this case, there weren't any bonuses, so this is a straight parallelization upgrade with no downsides other than its kind of negligible material cost. Given how many stupidly time-intensive alloy variants are needed for stuff moving forward, it is honestly a really solid investment at the price. Of course, the subnetting needed to prevent recipe conflicts while still allowing for context-dependent alloy crafting is an utter nightmare, and I will have to manually program fluid inputs until I can get advanced fluid stocking buses, and I'm all but certain there are edge cases where the recipes will still be able to miscraft. But if it means not having to wait 10 minutes for some fancy metal juice, I am okay with all of that. Polychromatic network ragu, I choose you. While we're at it, let's make a Mega Vacuum Freezer! Like every other Mega variant, it has 256 parallels, and it is a substantially smaller pain in the butt to upgrade one of these than it will be 16 of the regular kind, but it doesn't really do anything special other than take up 50 times the space and cost twice as much power to run. That said, given that I now have a theoretical maximum power output of 800 amps UHV, the power cost really isn't something I'm going to stress over too much. It even comes pre-equipped with a really unnecessary amount of real estate for advanced air intake hatches, so if my nitrogen production was ever a problem before, it sure isn't now. The fact that this thing hasn't taken off and punched a hole through my roof from air displacement alone is enough to prove that if the game has physics, they are firmly in the cartoon category. But wait! You know what's better than having one ginormous 16 by 16 by whatever Mega EBF that costs about as much as the rest of your factory combined? Why, having 2, of course, and making the second one more expensive. For the low cost of a mere 1,000 neutronium glass and a bunch of other stuff that nobody really cares about because 1,000 neutronium glass is kind of a yikes, I'm now the proud owner of a high-power, state-of-the-art ingot hotbox for all of my metal baking needs. Well, okay, no, for some of my baking needs, specifically any ingots that can be smelted with xenon at a cost-reducing gas type, but that is all the expensive ones, so it doesn't really matter. This lovely little monster can draw a maximum of 256 amps UHV, which is currently all of my power, because I'm still working on saturating my Nactors with Mark III fuel, and wouldn't you know it, that stuff takes a while to craft. Volcanuses may have some very nice efficiency bonuses, and transitioning away from them is going to be kind of a kick in the teeth for a bit, what with the more expensive recipes, but we are kind of at the point where building more power production is easier than building more Volcanus smelting arrays, so I will have to deal with it. With the exception of some passive processing that doesn't have high enough energy demands to be worth worrying about, finishing this last Mega EBF means I have successfully finished upgrading all of my smelting and vacuum freezing. This was the last step in the truly grueling process needed to modernize my base, but it's done! And it only took 25 minutes of the video. And that is after I cut out basically everything. Yeah, the endgame of this pack is gonna be real interesting to edit. But hey, that's a me problem. Point is, I have all my new toys, so while I'm waiting on the parts for my super not at all secret progression project to finish doing their thing, I get to tear apart all the old smelting systems and cannibalize their giblets for other bits of my base. Yay! Recycling! This rare instance of me reducing my technological footprint, combined with a rather unfortunate amount of backlogged crafting tasks that my system needs to catch up on before I can proceed further, offers me the chance to clean up my base a bit, and you had better believe I'm milking that for all it's worth. Quite a few of my building stacks have started capping out, and can't really go any higher without me popping a hole in the roof, so I pick a couple of the worst looking ones to get facade coverings that are, well, I won't say they're attractive, exactly, but they are at least aesthetically consistent with the rest of the factory, which helps cover up the ugly a little bit. The trickiest part was making the Nactor setup look like anything other than a radioactive dump. This is, for once, not entirely my fault, because I was kind of shoehorned into breaking my standard layout with the Nactors because of the restrictions on laser power transfer and my need to not have those pipes running above the ground. Faced with this challenge, I did what every normal first world country does with their radioactive dumps, which is slap some dirt on top, call it a park, and hope it doesn't start leaking heavy metals into the local water supply. Or, in my case, spontaneously explode, which is very much still a possibility. And so, with the last bit of waiting on machines out of the way, we can finally, 27 minutes into the episode, make some game progress. And no, I don't mean that I spent all this time trying to get this one block. That would be a little bit dumb. It's just that placing this structure is kind of a major pain in the butt. Like, seriously, a major pain in the butt. Survival autoplace is an unbelievably base mechanic, and I don't even have words to describe how grateful that I am that it was implemented universally, because there is no shot of me building this by hand. But it's also kind of jank. This multi is, of course, the Space Elevator, a monumentally massive piece of kit that sports an equally massive price tag. Describing what it does is kind of a process. In its basic state, all it does is let you travel through the solar system as long as you have a high enough tier of motor on it. Except for the Stargate planets, because those are special, so it's kind of like a one-way rocket. I naturally will not be using this feature because there are no planets to go to, and oh, you've got to be kidding me. I forgot the cable spool. This is literally the most important part. Alrighty, there we go. Wow, cable spool, fantastic. And also, the stupid survival autoplace broke. Fine, we'll build it by hand, whatever. Anyway, space travel with it is kind of more of a gimmick than its main purpose, though. The real fun begins when you add on modules to the thing. These modules come in 3 flavors: assembly, pumping, and mining. There are 2 more called Research and Project Manager, but I can't find anything on them, so my assumption is that they are unused. Assembly is basically just the standard paradigm of make a multi-block do a thing, but modularized into a bigger structure. It makes some recipes cheaper and lets me craft the next tier of circuits, and that's basically about it. Also, survival autoplace. Please, tell me why you are failing. You work great 95% of the time, but the other 5% you may as well kiss your butt goodbye, because I have no idea why this thing is complaining. Also, it turns out that the reason survival autoplace wasn't working was because I forgot to put a hole in the roof for the elevator. Would have been nice to know that that was a requirement, but, you know, survival autoplace can't tell you everything. Anyway, the pumping modules lets me use the power of technology and many hours of grinding to produce various liquids out of thin air using electricity. Canonically, the modules pull the liquids from the planet that you specify, but as mentioned earlier, no planets, so who really knows where they're coming from? This is incredibly useful, largely because unknown water is a pumpable option, which means I can get rid of the I kid you not, 7 UEV tier overclocked, fully automated fluid extractors I've had cranking away on comb extractions ever since I could make the stuff. The real prize, though, is mining. Pulling enormous blobs of ore from the sky with rituals powered by several hundred witches chugging Kool-Aid for hours on end is both a stable and reliable source of raw material. But it's just not fast enough. Even with bees supplementing my reserves of basically everything, the small handful of materials they can't produce in bulk have required a near constant stream of rocks to keep my storage systems topped up, and that problem is going to scale exponentially as I progress further. We aren't quite done with Goose Juice just yet, just because the game has one last major middle finger extended in my general direction that I'm going to be snapping off and incinerating with my teeth. But that, along with the question of how I will process and deal with all of this magically overwhelming amount of ore, is a question that will need to wait until the next episode. Until then, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.